Ideas. The purpose of our panel today is to discuss the subject, investors joining force, and how finance can be a big driver for political and sustainable change. Now, obviously, just a few thoughts on the subject. As you well know, many of you in the room run big businesses, aspire to run big businesses for the students among us. Some of you are economists and experts in different fields. The financial sector is currently obviously playing an increasingly vital role in helping countries and also companies transition towards greener, more sustainable futures. And obviously, private and public sectors are playing their role in that. But of course, as we've been hearing this morning and yesterday evening, recent events like what's happening in Ukraine and also the supply chain disruptions that COVID-19 have caused risk sapping the impetus that we've seen building up over the last few years. So that is the subject of our panel over the next 45 minutes. We're going to be discussing how this collaborative advantage that we're here to discuss over the next 2 days can actually keep the momentum going for climate change and what the risks are. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our esteemed panel of guests. We have a government minister and also a leader of industry who are experts in this field. Without further ado, let me introduce you to the Minister of Sustainability and the Environment, Madam Grace Fu, who joins us from the Republic of Singapore. Thank you, Minister. And also Mr. Andreas Brandstetter, who's the President of Insurance Europe, which is the Federation of European Insurers and Reinsurers. And Andreas, as many of you in the room probably also know, is the CEO of Unica, which is the insurance group. Thank you very much for joining us. Please take your seats. So I suppose the most obvious first question should be addressed to you, Madam Fu. Singapore has this really ambitious plan for completely rejigging your economy and your green credentials by 2030, and you're at the helm of that. What roughly is it? What are your ambitions, and how are you going to finance it?
Well, last year, we set up an ambitious plan to, as you say, transform the economy, the way that we work, the way that we live, the entire society, with 2030 deadline as a target. The reason for doing that is because Singapore is obviously a very small country with an island, and we are very vulnerable to climate change. And it's really for our own existence that we want to make sure that the whole world go on this transition to a net zero economy, to a net zero way of living in a more sustainable way. So it is a multi-ministry effort to bring together all facets that has an impact on carbon emissions, as well as on sustainable development. So very briefly, it has a field pillar, it has nature, city in nature, sustainable living, energy, remix. We have also the resilient future, as well as green economy, underpinned by the government putting behind its procurement and also its policy to support the transition, and also the horizontal of involving the entire society, all sectors of the economy, all sectors of the community in this process of change. Because this is probably the most significant change management that Singapore is undergoing in recent history. It's also the most significant change that the whole world needs, of finding an alternative view, of finding a different way of transporting our goods, a different way of treating our waste, and to have a different mindset about how we're consuming the resources on the world.
This is also about rejigging people's expectations and behaviour about how they live in Singapore, isn't it? I was reading that I wish London had some of these initiatives, I have to say, as a born and bred Londoner. You're aiming that all citizens can be within, say, walking distance of a green space, of a park, bicycling initiatives. There's so many places around the world that have come up with these ideas and never really been able to implement them.
Well, because in a way, Singapore has always been limited by our size, but we have not been limited with our ambition and our vision. So although we have a physical constraint, which require us to really look very seriously about how we arrange our work versus our play, our recreation spaces, but at the same time, really thinking out of the box to find new solutions to overcome our constraint. Other major cities may have a supported by larger hinterland, that people can go out to have their green spaces, but we don't. So very realistically, we have to find that compromise in a very small country. I just check it up. Switzerland is about 50 times the size of Singapore, and with about 130% of the population. So that's the kind of constraints that we have. But as I said, we are constrained, but we are not limited by our constraints.
And this concept of a new, greener, more sustainable future, not just being a luxury, as Madam Fu was pointing out here. Not everywhere in the world is that a message that is actually getting through, although actually from the insurance sector point of view, you're really at the forefront of having to pay for a lot of the climate change damage and having to model for that, right?
Right, because our industry is in Europe the largest investor. So altogether, we are managing something like close to 11 trillion of euros assets under management. And it's crucial, as Minister said, what we are doing with this money, because if we manage to direct those assets into the right direction, we will drive this necessary change, as you say, change program, and we are ready for this.
Your sector has signed up to an initiative with the United Nations, haven't you? Is that on track? Are you getting the right traction among all insurers, all financial parties? Because obviously there's money to be made by not investing in these green initiatives, particularly at the moment when the energy prices are high, there's a war not far from here, interest rates are rising.
So I would say there is a growing understanding within the industry that there is no alternative to this, right? So this is the only way which we have to go. But I like what you said. It's a question of, I think you addressed the word change. You said it's a change management, right? And same in my company, you need to create this sense of urgency, why you do it. You need to tell a narrative, the story, why it's a new world which we are building. And then stepwise, you agree on a very concrete plan, how you change in future, right? And this is not something which is going to happen tomorrow, but there is no alternative to this. And the whole industry basically is ready for this, I would say, on a global perspective. But of course, especially here in Europe, we experience different behaviors in certain countries. We had a huge discussion about this taxonomy, meaning the question, which regulations do we need? There was a huge discussion around nuclear energy, as you know, about gas and oil, which now driven by this conflict in the East between Russia and this war of Russia, like what it's getting again or even stronger in the focus. So there's something going on, yeah?
And indeed, you took a very public position against nuclear energy, didn't you?
Absolutely.
Why? And what's the logic behind speaking out on that subject?
I got a lot of negative feedback on this topic, frankly spoken. But I think if we talk about a new way of creating alternative energy, then we talk about wind, we talk about solar energy, we talk about water energy. And I understand that certain countries are depending more than others from nuclear energy, fine, or even from gas and oil as others do. But then we have to find a way in those countries how, on a transition path, we come out there. I think investors globally should understand what is included in taxonomy. Is it really pure alternative energy, or is there some investment there in nuclear power plants, for instance, or in other fossil energy carriers such as gas or oil, right? But what we do not like to have is a kind of greenwashing. I think this is what we don't deserve. I think this is over. There must be really absolute transparency for the investors.
How do you view that subject of greenwashing at the moment, obviously, when the EU has signalled that it's going to no longer buy fossil fuels from one of its biggest suppliers, Russia?
Yeah, I think we're doing better. We're getting better. Again, this is something as each transition which takes time, so don't expect miracles tomorrow. But every occasion we use to talk about it, every occasion we use to create awareness, it's really helping to address the problem, right? I think the most important thing, investors really have to know where are they putting their money into, right? Is it really alternative energy, or is it something else? This must be crystal clear.
Madam Fu.
I would take a more pragmatic approach, primarily because, as I mentioned about Singapore's constraint, we are really not, we're not a price taker in this. We have to take whatever technology that's out there. And I think it's important for us, from Singapore's point of view, to look at transition rather than an absolute position. Because, I mean, this invasion of Ukraine has basically made something that's very clear to every one of us, how interconnected we are, and also how disruption in energy supply can really change the livelihoods of and impact livelihoods of many countries in a very fundamental way. We're talking about people going hungry. We're talking about people going without energy to light or heating or to cook. So how do we collectively, including developing countries, to move towards a greener economy, a greener future? I think we have to be quite pragmatic, look at transition, and I totally agree with you on what taxonomy should do. What's the definition that we should do? How do we define green technology? How do we define green transition technology, for example? And I would like to urge, all of us, to keep an open mind, because technology is moving. Technology on nuclear is moving, and there are more safer options, maybe not immediately, but it is possible. So I think we should always be informed by science and take what is the most pragmatic way, which is a movement, rather than say that, if you're not here, you have to be there, the next year or the next 5 years. I think it's difficult, particularly for developing countries, to do that. And the more I think we insist on absolute black or white, the more I think we're going to leave people out of the conversations, because they find that this conversation has no place for me, because I don't see myself having hope of participating in that. I'm just too far away from the position they want. But if you tell countries that we are looking at helping you along the way, we're helping to reduce your carbon emission as you move forward. We have milestones, we have roadmap, so that you will eventually reach your goal in 30, 40 years' time. I think that will be an inclusive process.
So would you say that here in Europe, and I'm thinking in particular, say, for instance, the United Kingdom, where I live, without necessarily asking you to pinpoint certain countries, would you say that the policy mix has been a bit too blunt? Because for consumers and industries, being told all the cars will be electric by, I don't know, in 10 years' time, without seeing the charging stations being built, consumers are getting confused, private sector investors are wondering whether or not the policy mix will deliver at the end of the day. What are your thoughts on that around the world? Is it joined up enough, the thinking?
Don't get me wrong, I think some of these targets are necessary, because without the clear targets, without the roadmap, businesses will not know how to invest. Because if you're not clear about your move away from internal combustion engines, the car makers will continue to produce and continue to invest in these technology. But if you're very clear about how you're moving away, not necessarily towards EV, but towards low carbon technology in mobility, then I think it sends a signal to the businesses, and the business will know how to invest accordingly. Having said that, I think what technology of form of mobility, I think that's to be debated, whether it is what EV that we know of today, whether it is mass transport options, whether it's hydrogen, for example. I think we should keep an open mind, because things are evolving quite quickly. We are seeing a huge momentum of investments in technology by countries, by companies, and I would be very optimistic that we will have more options ahead of us, probably giving us better options in terms of security of fuel and also better mobility options.
Andreas, do you find that the regulatory framework that, as an investor, as an insurer, you're operating in, has enough clarity, has enough longevity around the world, or is it different countries? I mean, obviously we saw a big agreement over the summer in Glasgow, but is it a little bit stop and start?
No, I think we're moving into the right direction. I think it takes time to build up global coalitions, right? And we need coalitions between private investors, regulators, European global bodies. We need governments strongly in there. And it's a discussion process. Again, the thing is we have to create awareness, global awareness on this topic. And this is something what I sometimes compare with a change process in a business, in our company. We're running a people's business. We are serving like, I think, 17, 18 million of clients. And if there is an issue in the company which you have to address, you have to convince the own management, the stakeholder, why change is needed. The dangerous thing here is that in some parts of the world, we do not feel yet as consumer this sense for urgency, why we have to change. If we move out this room there, the world is the same as it was yesterday and as it will be tomorrow. You feel not, and please forgive me if I'm so blunt, you feel not any kind of immediate impact as far as climate change is concerned. You just feel it sometimes in summer times in this part of the world, when we have floodings, when we have, I got no idea, other stuff. You feel it sometimes in winter, when we have avalanches, whatever, stuff like that. But frankly spoken, in 90% of the time, 90% of the population in many parts of the world are not affected. This is the issue. So this means we have to tell a story. We have to earn the trust as opinion leaders why this change is necessary, right? So we have to address something which will, if we do not do it, harm the future in a tremendous way of the whole planet and of our children. And this is the challenge which we have to address.
So how does that affect your investment decision in developed versus developing economies? And Minister, I loved your example yesterday evening about the Jatropha plant, which I've been following for about 10 years. And you have a wonderful initiative in Ghana, you were saying, where Singaporean technology is helping with biofuels in a completely different part of the world. But each one of you, that difference between developed world economies thinking, this is only a problem that affects me a couple of times a year, and then obviously developing economies, obviously bearing the brunt of that. Andreas first.
Yeah, look, there's a kind of strong portion of egoism in this topic around. I will not mention the country, invited last year to speak at the annual conference of a European country where all the insurance companies have been presented, right? And I was telling them, look, guys, we have to move forward. We have to do something. We cannot, give you a very concrete example, we cannot offer insurance coverages anymore for coal mines. Very simple thing. There was a huge discussion in the room why this country should not offer coverages for coal mines in another country, because if they would basically not do it anymore, other insurance companies would do it.
Yeah.
I said, guys, if we keep on having this discussion, then we are lost, because we have to start. Then other discussions such as, oh, why should we move if certain Asian companies do not follow? So this is the absolutely wrong approach. So what we did, for instance, then we said, okay, my company, we just proactively, we stop offering certain coverages. We stop investing into assets which for sure are not sustainable. But to tell the story also in their own company, within my own company, is a huge topic, because what does it mean? You lose top line, you lose business, you lose a cost carrier, you lose profit. People might lose their bonus systems, yeah? Forgive me if I'm so open-minded now. And this is a change story which you have to tell. And we just say there is no alternative to this. So this is a very concrete example what difficulties we are facing if we talk in concrete about sustainability and green transformation.
So presumably if Greece says we're going to be opening coal mines because of the current energy issue with Russia, you couldn't insure them, for instance, but somebody else will.
Yeah, and maybe then someone else is doing the business for 2-3 years. I cannot forbid it, but I'm sure, and I tell the story, that we are on the right way. We are supporting a big goal which is relevant for the future of this planet. And yes, if there are other companies around who still offer coverages, they might do. But the number of companies is decreasing. The prices will increase, right? So, I mean, we are constantly building up pressure. This is what we can do.
Well, I think that's where government have to come in. Because companies will take decisions like that. There will be companies like yours that will, be very progressive and insist on being the leaders of change. But there are others who perhaps have a different standard. But if you look at what's needed out there, I mean, let's face it, as I mentioned, the demand for coal will be there for some time, even in Europe. And now with Ukraine's situation, disrupting energy supply, I think this topic will be in the discussion for some years to come. And what do we do about it? I think that's really questions for government. How do we manage the change? How do we keep this trajectory and momentum going while overcoming some of these humps that will come our way over the next 3 decades? We have to resolve them as they come and take, sensible, pragmatic approach, and yet have our eyes clearly on the target that we're going through. And I just give you an example. In Asia, China, for example, in 2020, installed the largest capacity on renewable and wind, and more than rest of the world added together. So they're doing massive implementation of green energy all the way out to the desert areas, supporting their domestic requirements in a massive, massive way. But they also want stability, political stability. And in the last few months, they have come out to say that they are also going to increase their coal extraction from their mines. Yeah. So the philosophy is 先立后破, which means I will have the alternative there and installed before I break the old systems away. That's the approach that China has taken. Are they on the right track? If you look at it from a macro perspective, they are going in that way. They are restricting environmental protection. They're restricting environmental pollution in their countries. They are going down to check on their companies. Recently, the Environment of Environment and Ecology have taken companies to task for wrongful reporting of their carbon emissions. So I think they are doing that, partly as a corporate global citizens, but at the same time is for their own benefit because their citizens demand for a better, more sustainable environment to live in. So there will be humps like this, and I think we should try to get as many countries and companies along this way. So government has to do their job to steer in that direction, and the global community has to do their job because some countries may say that I want to be the leader, but some countries will say that, look, development is more important to me, and therefore you go ahead. That is why multilateral forum like the UNFCCC is a very important forum where we ask for countries to make their pledges, where we ask for accountability in their reporting, and we're going down to taxonomy, definitions, and verification, basically for countries to be accountable and to reach that target in the long run.
Now, I know we're going to open up the floor to questions in just 1 minute, so please get ready to raise your hands. The era of big data obviously changes the accountability and viability structure for financial investments in this field, doesn't it? But on the other hand, you do have to balance that against the fact that just in the last week alone, we saw BP report record profits. Shell today reported record profits. If you're at the helm, Andreas, of a large listed company, how do you convince somebody not to invest in them and invest in you for the future?
How to invest not in those companies, then in our, what do you mean?
Yes, from a financial return point of view, when we've got inflation at a 40-year high, we've got interest rates rising today, the Bank of England's poised to put them up to a 13-year high. The Fed obviously made its decision just recently. So we are again at the sharp end of rather volatile markets. And I suppose what I'm asking is, do you foresee potentially a short-term return to short-termism? And how do you convince investors to stick with your strategy?
What we experienced that investors around the world ask us about our position on sustainability, and this gets more and more traction, right? So at the beginning, it was enough to have a kind of report where you say, okay, basically you have certain targets which you try to fulfill, but this was more a wishy-washy, more or less concept. This is getting more relevant. You have to really tell details. You have to tell on the next 3, 4, 5 years what steps in detail you do every year. For instance, we are a member in the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, which says commitment is the one thing, but the other thing is how on both sides of the P&L or the balance sheet, on the active and the passive side, what especially measures you take. So there is no chance to hide anymore. Maybe coming back to one argument what you just addressed before, when you talked about the roles of the governments. Something what we experience in certain governments is, yes, there is a kind of mentality sometimes not to have enough speed in creating alternative energy solutions. This is something what I experience, what we see in Europe especially. We saw, I think, a quite, I would say, elaborated package. They call it, I think, the Easter package in Germany, which was created a couple of weeks ago. If you look to the country where I come from, Austria, well, there is this kind of not in my backyard mentality, which is a huge discussion, right? So no one wants to have electricity coming from coal mines. No one in Austria wants to have energy coming out from nuclear power plants. Bracket, we all know that in winter days, starting at 3 p.m., a large portion of electricity which is used in Vienna comes from Slovakian nuclear power plants, but this is, you cannot see it. And this is this moralic dilemma in which a Western society might be in, right? But this not in my backyard means, okay, we don't want to have dirty electricity, and yes, we are all in favor of windmills, of solar panels. We all love clear water energy, but please not in the Austrian Alps, right? And not in my backyard. Oh no, and we do not want to have those windmills somewhere in, I don't know, some nature park in Austria. And this is a discussion where politicians must take a leader role in, right? It's not possible anymore saying, okay, we ask the whole population the whole time for the opinion. This means also taking unpopular measures. This is what in, I would say, a relevant number of European countries is not happening at the moment. And this raises concerns because I think that we are not quick enough in really building up alternative energy solutions and sources.
But there's this issue about cost and cost of living as well, as we have seen in the recent French election. Cost of living is the number one topic.
Yeah.
And just imagine putting another 30% premium on electricity if you're completely going to move into a new technology altogether and ditch coal. So these are very pragmatic and very real problems on the ground. And I was just having some discussions with the young people, outside at the coffee break earlier on. And, they are seized with this sustainability issue.
Yeah.
But when it comes to crunch, are you prepared to pay more for everything that you consume when it's produced on a sustainable basis? And there's hesitation.
There's a big intergenerational disconnect as well in some countries.
It's not just intergeneration. All generations has problem. Yes, ideally, I'd like to have things that are done sustainably. But I think we need to realize that there can be a price.
Yeah.
Or there can be an inconvenience. Just imagine that not taking your car and taking the bus or walking, there's inconvenience. So there's a change in lifestyle needed. So I think we need to have that discussion, not just intergenerationally, but actually with everyone, every segment of the population. And just coming back to the question about financial system. And I think, again, that's where the role of central banks and regulators come in. We know that that's an issue, and if we don't act fast enough, just imagine the amount of loss and damages that we need to compensate from the insurance company point of view with climate change. Just imagine the kind of exposure banks, pension funds is going to be exposed to if their assets are, not climate resistant. So I've always used this story, right? If you know that in 30 years' time, you're going to have 2 meters higher sea levels, are you going to invest in the same beachside hotel, resorts that you have now? You enjoy going there.
Yeah.
But what will be your investment decision? So that's very real. And I think a good regulator will have to start from that starting point and say that, okay, what do I need to do today to make sure that my portfolio would withstand the kind of climate consequences? And of course, we hope that everybody will we will all get our act together as humanity to avoid the kind of catastrophic disaster 30 years down the road. But if that's the way to think about, issues and asset prices and pension funds, I think that's really sending a signal to all of us here today that's making the decision that we need to start responsibly. We need to invest in companies that do the right decision. Right now, we lack a kind of common taxonomy, a common definition across regions. And we lack the common regulatory reporting requirements. So much so that it's difficult for investors to pick up who's doing the right thing and who's not.
And comparing over the same time frame as well.
Yes. So it's easy for groups to call this greenwashing, but is it fair? Is it a fair judgment? We don't know unless we put all the companies and all the reports together in a very easy way to extract with the use of IT, big data, satellite monitoring to tell us who is doing the right thing and therefore deserve the lower cost of capital and who's not, which then requires a premium on its cost of capital. Right now, I think that's the urgent thing we need at the financial level for the world to get together so that we can agree on disclosure, reporting standards, and also reporting verification. In other words, I have to check what you're reporting, and you have your data out there that's easy for everybody to just pick up and know what you're actually doing.
Thank you. Let's start taking some questions. We have 2 questions there in the middle row. Thank you.
Hello. My question is to both panelists. How are investors and policymakers leveraging technology to both measure and reward the people and planet impact of sustainable measures?
Okay, thank you very much. Minister?
It is such a difficult and good question. In fact, we are looking to you for solutions. Because what sustainability as a sector desperately need is really people who can put the impact into dollars and cents and to put the benefits into dollars and cents right now. Because otherwise, ESG will be something that is non-tangible, it's fluffy. So we need to help translate that. Probably we need the help of economists, we need engineers, we need IT people who can help us bring the data together to track and put it into a model that we can all understand. And in this whole process of verification, Internet of Things, blockchain are possible technologies for us to enable us to track and to verify in a very easy way. In the past, I think this is really a complex issue. It just takes tremendous manual work, manual spreadsheets. But now I think technology has offered us opportunities. And in Singapore, we're going to put some money. We're going to put $50 million to encourage startups to look at issues such as this. How do we apply technology to help us answer some of the very basic questions of who's doing right and who's not?
Are you doing public-private sector collaborations as well?
Oh, absolutely. Basically, where the fund is going out there for the finance sector to apply and for projects to be funded by the government.
Is that crucial to keep the momentum going? Obviously, it's a model that you know well.
Let's put it this way. We're very clear that we do not have the expertise. This is an area that's not in the government yet. And I think outside the government, the private sector, there's so much that's going on. I mean, you just talk to some of you and the kind of startups you're involved in. It's even areas that I have to ask, what exactly are you doing, right? So that's where I think this intergeneration discussion is very interesting because we have a need as government, and you have the solutions, you have the know-how, and you can think about applying what you know to solve our problem. And I think this is an approach that we're taking in Singapore, that we are really galvanizing and mobilizing the resources in the private sector.
Yeah, just adding to what we just heard, I mean, I would underline it to a large portion. I'm not so much concerned as you are about not having the right speed in setting up a joint regulation. I'm not so much concerned. I have a lot of trust into regulators globally and governments, and we are moving closer to each other. So I don't have a kind of big issue here. I have not a distrust that we have super intelligent, bright minds such as you are, who really, as you say, bring the right ideas and great innovations to the table. The industry, our company, we are investing billions of euros into this year per year. So I think I'm not so much concerned about this. I think we're moving really ahead with the only one comment, if we're really on the governmental sides, in many countries, showing the right speed, the proper speed. This is my comment. I'm much more worried about the mindset. This is what I'm so worried about, and you mentioned it, when it comes to the own personality, to my own life, I'm ready to pay a higher price? Am I ready not to use the car? Am I ready not to fly, I don't know, 2 times per year on vacation? And I got no idea where it will end. But this is what I meant by this sense of urgency, right? All of you who are working for a corporate company know how difficult it is really to drive a change program. And this is a global change program which we are in, and every day we are not moving ahead is a lost day. The thing is just, again, how do you make it tangible, this need for change, if, again, you do not experience it on a daily basis? I have no solution for this, and this is what I think we are asked for as global community, addressing it, talking about it, not neglecting it, not letting it fall below the table. And well, this is what drives me, where I think a lot about how can we add here value on this discussion globally.
Thank you. Let's take another question. All right. Since we have another question, we have a few actually. Let's take one over at the back. Thanks, and then a couple from the right. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Peter. I'm a leader of Tomorrow, and my question is related to the EU reaction to the Russian crisis. So the EU has been setting very strict targets for becoming independent of Russian carbon fuels and Russian energy sources. And I see that this is creating a new form of pressure on a lot of countries, a lot of governments, especially in Central Eastern Europe or Southern Europe. Do you think that this is a risk or a danger, that this pressure might incentivize some governments to go under the counter and go around the green transition and still try to get their resources from non-sustainable, or get their energy from non-sustainable resources? And do you think that this is a danger that creates new path dependencies that would then require another crisis to potentially alter? Thank you very much.
Can I ask a quick specific about your question? When you say other countries sort of going under the counter, are you talking about inside the EU or other countries just worldwide decoupling?
I think, yeah, inside the EU, you can see quite a few countries countering this, but also globally, I think both are relevant. But let's say inside the EU,
okay.
I think it's more
First, Andreas, let me ask you that.
Yeah, very clear answer to this. So currently we see that, as you mentioned, some countries within the European Union are much more dependent from Russian energy sources. It's my own country. I think it's Germany, it's Hungary, as far as I know. And this means that these countries, for a certain period of time, for some years, need some kind of alternative, old energy, till they are so far that they can really use the power of alternative energy sources. And yes, the danger is there, and we will see that some countries, for a certain period of time, in a transition period, will run into danger buying other old energy from other countries where maybe it's also problematic from various point of views, and which are not really maybe on the long-term perspective reliable partners. So I would really underline what you said, and I would say, yes, there is this concrete danger, which on the other hand really pushes my argument from before, saying we need much more speed in Europe in building up alternative energy sources.
Madam Minister, where do you think that danger is going to lead?
I really like to hear the answers on Friday as well. I think there is a session on energy, and sure, maybe Peter should post your question again. But I would like to maybe look at it in two ways. One is really energy security, and the second one is decarbonization. And then in the short run, I think all of us around the world has to deal with rising costs of petrol, electricity, and we have to look at, in our own way, the best way to solve our cost of living issue. So there may be some temptation to do what you have said. But on the other hand, I think in the long run, when we look at energy security, and if you think about where to invest and what to invest to have your own security, and it will be foolish for any government to look at carbon-intensive alternatives because of what I've said about, if you look at 30 years down the road, the future is so clear for you to be holding some of these stranded assets. It just doesn't make financial sense. So short run, yes, perhaps there will be some of these hiccups, the humps that come our way, but in the long run, I think it's accelerating the move, the investments into renewable.
Take a question from this side of the room. I think there was a question. Anybody raise your hand? There we go. The lady there with your hand up.
Thank you so much. My name is Emma. I'm a leader for tomorrow. My question is to Madam Fu. What are your thoughts on linking sovereign debt to climate and nature outcomes? The context being that Africa, for example, being the least emitter for carbon emissions, and Namibia specifically leapfrogging towards energy transitions, solar, wind, and even being a frontier for green hydrogen. What are your thoughts on then linking sovereign debt, especially in developing countries like Namibia, to nature and climate outcomes? Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'm not so sure whether we should link sovereign debts to that, because I think Sustainable Development Goals, 17 of them, all of them are worthy of our consideration. So I think in the country's development, environmental consideration, climate is an important one, but there are many other important considerations. But I would say that sustainability, particularly if I've seen the kind of momentum that's coming from the private sector, I see a very, very good chance for investments into developing countries, such as some in Africa, to benefit from investments in green technology. I was just sharing an example about how one company in Singapore has a improved variety of seed in the Jatropha plant that actually is a source of biofuel. So, and the important features of this plant is that it can grow in very hardy conditions. And very often it's really sort of semi-arid as well as deserty kind of land that you can have this plant growing. The improvement that the Singapore company did was to improve the yield. In the past, in a period of drought, you may have 2 to 3 fruits and therefore very lousy yield. But we have improved the seed variety that can totally reverse the ratio of female flowers to male flowers. So much more fruits being found in those plants. And the good thing about this project is that it has gotten carbon credit certification, which takes into consideration its impact on the local community, because it's a plant that actually rehabilitates the land, and therefore you can have secondary plantation around it. The reason why I'm bringing this is really, I see that it is a possibility where finance will find its way through carbon credit to some of these developmental projects that otherwise would be maybe wholly relying on public finance of the country or multilateral development banks. But when carbon credit comes into play, then all the private sectors, all the business leaders here, even those that are in logistics, those that are in airline, would look at this quite differently. And we see this as a possibility of innovative way of bringing finance into climate adaptation in a very concrete way. So it's one example, but I'm very hopeful that we'll see many more innovations across many sectors of development.
Okay, thank you. Let's take another question at the back, sir, with your hand up.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm one of the leaders of Chimor as well. Forgive me for maybe the naive question. My background is not in policy or sustainability. I'm a lab-based scientist, so I'm a neuroscientist by training.
So essential for solving sustainability problems,
Right,
you know.
thank you.
Yes.
I'm a scientist by degree as well, so
Right, okay, so
I'm with you.
I'm well represented. My question is around one of those issues that I think is essential to any challenge that we're facing today. I think it's one of the issues that is always there, but we don't often talk about it. But in my experience as a PhD student, I've seen many bright people in Cambridge where I'm working, but also here at the Leaders of Tomorrow. I've asked them about their career aspirations and what they would like to do to make an impact. And unfortunately, the answer that you always get is probably corporate or some sort of NGO job that is unrelated to political institutions. So I'm concerned about some of the things that we talked about today. We talked about state actors and non-state actors. I'm concerned that my generation doesn't see any attractiveness, any accessibility to political institutions. And I'm concerned that this is a growing trend. I think climate change is the biggest one of the biggest emergency for our generation. Nonetheless, the people that we see in government have 30, 40 years more than us. And the urge that they might feel is different from the one that a 30-year-old or a 27-year-old might feel today. So how do we encourage people that are bright, have a passion for policy making, to actually go to the government and make those calls, make those decisions that can have an impact on our generation and the future generations? Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Fu. Well, thank you for asking that. The fact that you're raising this as an issue, I'm sure many of the young leaders are thinking and reflecting, I'm sure. Would I add public service as one of my career options? And I will encourage you to do that. And I think it's important because we need a strong public service infrastructure in order for policies to work. Whether it is public service or politics, I think we need good people, we need good minds. And I think in Singapore, we are just a little bit nervous about not having enough talent in the public service, that we would consciously, through scholarships and through many other recruitment schemes, attract sort of the brightest into the public service. And it has served us well. So I just want to say that it is for each country to find its own solutions. But very often when we talked about a truly optimized system, you need good people in the private sector, you need good people in the non-state organizations, in the NGOs, but you also need good people, policymakers in the public sector in order to have a strong tripod to stand on. A weakened policy-making framework or system actually sometimes will hold us back. And I think it's for each of us to maybe encourage our children to think about, public service, think about politics as a way of contributing back to humanity. And that's one thing that I am so encouraged when I look at the whole St. Gallen model, that 50 years ago, you would do something like this to encourage this intergenerational discussion. But we also hear from people around this floor that because they benefited from this, they want to do the same for the future generation, and they're contributing back in very concrete ways. And that shows the kind of human spirit, the values of us wanting to do good to the next generation, that charity of deeds that you want to put back because you have benefited, you want to put it, to the next generation. And I think that's the kind of spirit that will see us moving along the climate and sustainability sector, because that's exactly what it is. What we do today, hopefully, will leave behind a better world for the future generation. And I think every one of us have our values, but I hope that you always consider your existence. What does it mean to the greater society, and whether you have a much greater impact and value to the society than, say, just your own.
And what's so special about the St. Gallen Symposium is that the intergenerational conversation continues apace. So I'm just going to ask the last question to Andreas just briefly, because our session is about to wrap up. We hear time and time again about the sense of urgency, particularly among younger people entering the workforce. When you're employing young people, looking for a sense of purpose as well as a livelihood, do you feel that the world now still has the same sense of urgency, that the financial sector still is providing the right capital and enough of it to try and affect change in climate, in the battle against climate change today?
Yeah, I think the sense of urgency is increasing. This is the good message. I like the last question a lot. It was really amazing. I have some experience myself in public servicing, where I started my career. And the good thing also is, like, we see also here some PPP models, right? We see some exchange between corporate bodies and governments, and this is what I really admire, because as we just heard in an impressive way, I think it really enriches the horizon. You get much more options, you get another way of thinking, so I like it. But to answer in a very short-term way, because I think time is over, yes, absolutely. So I think we are here on a good track. And the sense of urgency basically is increasing, but on the other hand, by far, it's still not there yet where it should be, right? So forums as this are amazing, an amazing possibility to bring us all closer together, united, facing one common target.
Well, that's a rare note of optimism in days like these. It's great to be able to end on such an optimistic and enlightening note. I'd like to thank my guests and also the audience. Grace Fu, thank you very much. Madam Minister, for joining us, and also Andreas Brandstetter as well. Thank you, the audience. I'll hand it back to Catherine and the organisers, but please continue the conversation around the multiple coffee breaks as well. Thank you.